You probably think a pregnancy test is the only way to know. Ancient humans had no tests, no doctors, no scans, and yet they knew. Some of them knew within days. How? Start with the most obvious sign, the one your body still gives today, a missed cycle. Ancient women didn't need a calendar app to notice this. They lived in tight communities, often sleeping, eating, and working alongside other women whose cycles they knew almost as well as their own. When something that had been consistent for years suddenly stopped, it stood out immediately. This wasn't guesswork. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies, groups that still live without modern medicine today, have documented this exact pattern. Women in these communities track their cycles with remarkable precision, not through writing, but through memory, routine, and the close social bond of living in small groups where almost nothing goes unnoticed. But a missed cycle alone wasn't proof. Stress, hunger, illness, all of these could delay it too, and ancient communities knew that. So they looked for something else, something the body does almost immediately, often before a missed cycle is even confirmed. Nausea. What we now call morning sickness actually has a function most people never think about. Researchers studying the biology of early pregnancy have found that this nausea isn't random discomfort. It's believed to be the body's way of pushing pregnant women away from foods that could carry toxins or pathogens dangerous to a developing fetus, at exactly the moment the immune system is naturally weaker. Ancient women would have noticed this pattern across generations, mothers, sisters, and friends, all experiencing the same strange aversion to certain smells and foods within weeks of a missed cycle. Once you see that pattern enough times, it stops being a coincidence and starts being a signal. Then there were the physical changes nausea alone couldn't explain. Tenderness and swelling in the chest, often one of the earliest noticeable shifts in the body, sometimes appearing even before nausea does. Ancient women living in close quarters, often without much privacy, would have noticed these changes in themselves and in each other almost immediately. There's also a subtler sign that modern fertility tracking still relies on today, a small but consistent rise in body temperature that follows ovulation and stays elevated if pregnancy occurs. You don't need a thermometer to feel warmer than usual over several consecutive weeks, especially if you're someone whose body has run at a predictable rhythm for years. None of these signs on their own were definitive, but stacked together, a missed cycle, sudden nausea, tender swelling, a shift in body temperature, they formed a pattern reliable enough that experienced women could read it with real confidence, often well before it would have been visibly obvious to anyone else. This is where something easy to overlook becomes incredibly important: the role of older women in the group. In almost every documented hunter-gatherer society, there were women, usually past their own childbearing years, who had witnessed dozens, sometimes hundreds of pregnancies over their lifetime. They weren't doctors in any formal sense, but they had something arguably more valuable: direct, repeated, lived experience. They knew what early pregnancy looked like because they had seen it play out again and again in their daughters, their sisters, their friends. Anthropologists have a term for this accumulated practical knowledge passed down without writing, traditional ecological knowledge, and it applied just as much to the human body as it did to plants, animals, and the land. A younger woman noticing subtle changes in herself didn't have to figure it out alone. She had access to an entire living archive of human reproductive experience walking around in the bodies of the women who raised her. But knowledge passed down through observation eventually turned into something even more interesting: actual tests. One of the strangest and most well-documented examples comes from ancient Egypt, recorded on papyrus dating back thousands of years. Egyptian women would urinate on separate batches of wheat and barley seeds over several days. If the wheat sprouted, They believed it predicted a girl. If the barley sprouted, a boy. If neither sprouted at all, they took it as a sign that no pregnancy was present. For centuries, this probably sounded like pure superstition to modern observers. Then, in the 1960s, researchers actually tested it. They took urine samples from pregnant and non-pregnant women and applied them to wheat and barley seeds under controlled conditions. The result was startling. The urine from pregnant women caused noticeably higher germination rates than urine from non-pregnant women. Nobody in ancient Egypt understood hormones. They had no idea what elevated estrogen levels were doing to those seeds. But somehow, through pure trial and error repeated across countless generations, they landed on a method that modern science would later confirm actually worked, at least for detecting pregnancy itself, even if the gender prediction part turned out to be coincidence. As the weeks turned into months, the signs stopped being subtle entirely. The most obvious one, movement. Somewhere in the second trimester, a pregnant woman begins to feel the fetus shifting inside her, what's often described as a faint fluttering at first, growing into unmistakable kicks and rolls later on. Ancient cultures across the world had specific names and beliefs surrounding this moment, often treating it as the point where a pregnancy became fully confirmed and socially acknowledged, sometimes even treated as the moment the child was considered truly alive. Alongside this came the visible growth of the abdomen, the widening of the hips in preparation for birth, and changes in skin and hair that experienced women had learned to recognize as part of the same unfolding pattern. By this stage, there was no ambiguity left. The body had moved from giving quiet hints to making an announcement nobody could miss. Now, to be fair, none of this was foolproof, and pretending otherwise would be misleading. Early signs like nausea and missed cycles could be caused by illness, stress, or malnutrition, all of which were common realities in ancient life. There are historical and anthropological records of women believing themselves pregnant for months, only for those signs to fade without an actual birth, a phenomenon modern medicine now recognizes as a real psychological and physical condition. The wheat and barley test, accurate as it was for detecting pregnancy hormones, said nothing about whether that pregnancy would survive to term, something tragically common in a world without modern prenatal care. So, ancient knowledge wasn't a perfect science. It was closer to a constantly refined pattern recognition system, built and rebuilt over thousands of years by women who had every reason to get it right, because getting it wrong could mean the difference between preparing for a birth and being caught completely unprepared. And getting it right actually mattered more than people today might assume. Knowing early wasn't just emotionally significant, it directly affected survival for both the mother and the child. A woman who knew she was pregnant could begin adjusting almost immediately, eating differently when food allowed for it, avoiding certain physically demanding tasks, and signaling to the rest of the group that extra care and resources might be needed in the months ahead. In small, interdependent communities where every member's labor mattered, this early knowledge let the group plan around her, shifting responsibilities, protecting her from unnecessary risk, all of it built on information that came entirely from careful observation rather than any kind of medical confirmation. This is part of why the knowledge was so closely guarded and so carefully passed down. It wasn't just useful information. In a world with no safety net, recognizing pregnancy early could be the difference between a successful birth and a devastating loss. Here's the part that genuinely surprises most people when they hear it for the first time. Modern science hasn't just confirmed that some of these ancient methods worked, it's found that the underlying biological signals ancient women were reading are remarkably similar to what hospitals still check for today. That rise in body temperature after ovulation, still used in fertility tracking, the hormone responsible for that strange wheat and barley reaction in ancient Egypt. The exact same hormone modern pregnancy tests detect in urine, just using a chemical strip instead of a seed. Even nausea, once dismissed as simply unpleasant, is now understood by researchers as a likely evolutionary adaptation with a real protective function. None of this means ancient women understood biology the way we do now. They didn't know about hormones, follicles, or human chorionic gonadotropin. But they understood patterns. They understood cause and effect, repeated and refined across an almost unimaginable number of observed pregnancies, stretching back further than written history itself. In a strange way, they were running a kind of long-term biological experiment, one passed down for tens of thousands of years, long before anyone had a name for the science behind it. And here's the part that puts everything into a completely different perspective. This knowledge wasn't just passed down by accident, it shaped human survival on a species-wide level. Every single person alive today exists because somewhere in their ancestral line, a woman correctly recognized the early signs of pregnancy, prepared for it, and survived long enough to pass that information forward. Multiply that across hundreds of thousands of years, across millions of individual pregnancies, and you start to see this wasn't just folk knowledge, it was one of the most quietly essential survival systems our species ever developed, running continuously in the background of human history, refined generation after generation by women who left no written records, but whose accumulated observations were precise enough that some of them are still technically accurate by modern medical standards. We tend to think of ancient humans as primitive when it comes to biology. But in this one specific area, reading the earliest signs the human body gives, they weren't guessing. They were running one of the longest, most consistently repeated scientific observations in human history. They just never called it science. So the next time you think about how far medicine has come, pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, blood panels that can confirm everything within days, remember that long before any of it existed, ancient women were already reading the same signals, just without the technology to name them. A missed cycle, a wave of nausea, a change in temperature they could feel without ever measuring it. They didn't need a test. They had thousands of years of careful observation passed down by every woman who came before them, and somehow that was enough.